Hello, everyone. Come on in and get settled. We'll get started in just a bit. Hi, everyone. I'm L'Oreal Lance, CTAA's Member Services Director, and I'm so excited for you to be joining us for our final membership, members only webinar of the year with our friends at Spare. Now, before I turn it over to them to give you all this good content on Paratransit, I just wanted to say a little reminder and announcement that next week, our Expo 2023 registration will be live for our time in Oklahoma City, and you will be able to see Spare there in the exhibit hall. So we hope that you all get to registering, get your hotels booked, your flights booked, and we look forward to seeing you in Oklahoma City in May. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Christopher to talk all things paratransit.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to this really exciting webinar where we're going to talk a little bit how to use technology to actually optimize some of your paratransit services. To give a quick introduction to the people attending, to the panelists today, we have Estella who's a mobility planner at Mountain Line. We have Sharad, who's a paratransit advisor here at Spare. And we have myself, Christopher, who is one of the co-founders and the CEO of Spare. So first, let's turn it over to Estella to introduce herself.
Thank you, Christopher. Hi, everyone. My name is Estella Hollander, mobility planner with Mountain Line, and we are based in Flagstaff, Arizona. We're the transit authority there. And I have definitely experience with paratransit as well as microtransit. 2 years ago, we received a grant from CTAA to implement a pilot for microtransit. Also have experience with grant writing, regional transportation services, and first mile, last mile solution. And just really passionate about creating active and livable cities that really put people first.
Cool. Thanks, Estelle, for being here. Sharad.
Hi, everyone. Sharad Agarwal. I'm an advisor for Spare since 2018. 20 years of transportation experience, everything from small limos and charter buses, and then spent the last about 15 years of my career in public transit, primarily at First Transit, working on a number of different paratransit call centers and different innovations for the company, looking at ways to bring in technology into how to adapt it to operations and really showing how the improvements and the changes can be made with technology directly into operations.
Thanks for being here, Sharad. And then quickly about myself, I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Spare. I've been actively involved in making modern paratransit and microtransit services here at Spare for the last 7 years. I am an engineer by education, so I'm clearly also a nerd by that, and I've been deep diving into the world of mobility in the past 7 years, and been such an exciting journey to be part of, really seeing what technology can do to improve services like paratransit here in this country. So let's kind of start kicking off some questions here. Let's turn it over to Estella first. Estella, can you please cover a little bit about how your paratransit service looked like and operated prior to making the changes that you did, and some of the challenges that you confronted at that time?
Yes. So our paratransit service was very traditional in the sense, we had bookings 24-hour in advance or the day before. The software that we're using was definitely a legacy software. All of our dispatch would create manifests. It was all very manual. So if we would receive kind of a last minute request, we might have to, redo some of the manifests. So definitely very a lot of time that took to create these manifests. In addition, our paratransit had a lot of downtime. So for example, from like our last drop off to our next pickup would sometimes be anywhere from like half an hour to 2 hours of just waiting and sitting in the field. And so we wanted to better utilize these vehicles from cost perspective, but also from just better utilization. And then Mountain Line, we're challenged with funding in terms of operating funding. We're really maxed out. We're using all of our operating funds from the fixed route perspective, but also from the paratransit perspective. And we, of course, have other needs in our community that have not been met. So we had some mobility gaps or areas in Flagstaff that needed some sort of transportation options, but didn't have any. So that's where we wanted to introduce microtransit. And so that was a grant from kind of CTA help kind of start and help implement that project. But what's unique about this microtransit is that it's commingled with our paratransit. So we're actually utilizing one vehicle for both paratransit and microtransit. And riders, you could have a microtransit or a paratransit rider on the same vehicle. So essentially we were able to do more with the same amount of operating funds. We were able to actually serve this area without having to add any additional vehicles. And like many agencies, I'm sure on here, we are challenged with driver shortages. And so really with the commingling, we were able to start this pilot without having to add a dedicated vehicle. I think we still would not have been able to implement this pilot if it wasn't for commingling, just because we didn't have that extra set of drivers available.
Very interesting, thank you. And with kind of with the technology provider like Spare, how has that actually helped you overcome some of these challenges that you were facing? I know that you all have also been experimenting with additional providers lately too, so it could be interesting to hear about that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely started with the commingling. I just wanted to reiterate that really helped increase our number of trips per hour. Also, again, was able to serve an area that previously had zero mobility options, so able to provide them with the microtransit. And then recently, in July, Spare has a partnership with Lyft, so the transportation network company. And so we've been able to integrate that into both our microtransit and our paratransit services. So currently a paratransit rider has a choice between, taking a Lyft trip or using one of our paratransit vans. And that's been able to help, again, with that driver shortages so that, we can, again, if the rider wants, they can go on the Lyft trips. They're able to have more spontaneity in their trips, and also can help with costs. I'll go into more details on some numbers later in the webinar, but essentially, we're not having to maybe put an extra driver out to meet the demand. We can be able to use Lyft as another provider to help managing demand.
That's very interesting. Cool. And maybe kind of talking a little bit more broadly in the scope of paratransit. Paratransit hasn't really undergone much innovation in the past 20 years. In your opinion, and maybe let's start with you, Estella, first, what barriers do you think currently stand in the way of making transit more accessible for everyone?
Yeah, I definitely think the regulations that are in place can be a challenge. I think, when they were put in place, they came with good intent. But I think often trying to meet some of the very sort of rigid paratransit regulations, it can often scare agencies. And I think it can sometimes kind of hinder innovation and kind of thinking outside the box and making sure that we're meeting all the regulations. So I think that's definitely one piece that can sometimes hinder innovation, is kind of just, being able to overcome those regulations, making sure that, we are meeting it, but, still putting the rider first. I mean, being able to for the rider to take same day trips, be able to to not have to book in advance, being able to have them being able to be in control of their trip. So being able to maybe use an app and be in control of scheduling and canceling the rides or changing their schedule.
That's very interesting. Sharad, any thoughts on this from your end?
Yeah, Estella makes a lot of the great points there. I mean, when Paratransit started 30 years ago, it was very similar to fixed route, where you'd have a dedicated vehicle and it was really just everything was done manually. And then there was some movement towards adding some new software, which made scheduling more automatic. And then we moved into vehicle MDTs. So some of the barriers started to get removed as we started to increase technologies with just like traditional software and MDTs. But the last like 15 years, I think the barriers have been lifted a lot to improve, I think, really just with self-service and smartphones. I think a lot of things that Estelle has mentioned about being able to give the rider a lot more flexibility in web booking and mobile booking, notifications that are coming out. I think really the softwares are starting to evolve quite a bit, and we're starting to see much fewer, the barriers are starting to get reduced with some of the new technology that's coming out there. And then I think the biggest barriers has always been is staffing and driver shortages. So the more and more that we're starting to see use of supporting services like Lyft or other types of providers and tools that make simple dispatching and scheduling simpler, I think the barriers will start to continue to come down that have always been there with the pre-scheduling and some of the rules that have been set in place. And then of course, funding is always the biggest question on barriers when it comes to paratransit. So I think even going back to like where the systems are evolving to, a lot of things that we've talked about are actually cost savings, and that money can be reused to put back into more service or just to enhance services. So I think there's some improvements on the horizon to go after a lot of those barriers that have been there.
Right. And from your perspective, Sharad, what changes can Paratransit Services make to adapt with rapidly changing times with the advent of new technology and whatnot?
Sure. I think the two main things really is improving the self-serviceability of the tools. I think the communication, increasing the ability to communicate in simplest forms, even just simple things as IVR and SMSs, just improving as much more and more communication to the riders definitely improves their ability to book, reduces cancellations, improves efficiencies of the services by communicating with the riders. And then I think the other piece is really looking at how do we increase the fleet size. And I don't mean adding more, going to the FTA and getting more capital resources to buy more vehicles, but finding more and more partners that are already there. The commingling aspect that Mountain Line is doing is not only just with the existing city vehicles, but can we start bringing in local providers that are doing medical trips? Can we bring in more taxi companies that are doing retail trips, and just commingling all the fleets that are already in the market? I think that is really the biggest opportunity for paratransit to become more effective, improve on-time performance, and ultimately reduce costs.
I see. And actually a follow-up question on that, Sharad. I mean, in many places, there may not be too many different providers, especially in more suburban and rural places. Any suggestions around, thoughts around maybe achieving that when you don't have too many providers around?
Sure. I think very true. You're not going to find the big TNCs in most markets. You're not going to find the big taxi companies. I think there's the advantage of what new software is now able to do is even just one or two local taxi companies could drive. I think in general, most markets have a medical provider of some kind. And then one that we really started looking at more is volunteers. How can you include volunteers in this service that are available for one or two trips a week, just putting them into the network? Because we know that a lot of systems are not all centralized. Trips sometimes are 20, 30 miles away from the center. So finding different solutions for trips is the key thing. So really commingling, and then with local providers, then ultimately even looking at volunteers.
Right. Estella, did you have anything to?
I just have one thing to add. I just want to make sure it's clear of just how easy it is for a third-party provider to use Spare. You don't need any specific hardware, really just a smartphone is able to work. So just want to make sure that you don't need like a special tablet or anything. I mean, obviously any sort of tablet can work, but there's not like a proprietary tablet necessary. So yeah, definitely volunteer drivers could work, where if they have some sort of smartphone with service could work.
Yeah, for sure, because they could just download and install the app on their smartphone or tablet, just their current personal one. Yeah, that makes thanks for mentioning that, Estella. Cool. Maybe let's go on to around the power of technology partners. Sharad, how can the right technology partners support paratransit?
I think one of the key things with Para is that there's been a lot of investment made in software and technology over the last several years. So the first thing to come in and say we're going to replace everything and use our software is not probably the right initial approach. So I think the ability to have open APIs and being able to integrate with other software to at least as a bridge, or at least to show growth, or to show some parallel ability to change, I think is a good starting point. Also, there's going to be, and not just in software, but there's going to be ticketing providers, there's going to be hardware providers. So you want to have the flexibility to be able to integrate with a lot of those tools initially, as we then eventually look to maybe replace in the long run. But I think having that integration ability with other partners and other technology companies is a good starting point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Estella, any thoughts around that from your side?
Yeah, I think definitely a technology provider can provide a wealth of information. I mean, Spare has many numerous partnerships with different partnerships, not only in the US, but in other countries as well. And so they can really help bring new ideas and innovation to an agency and say, hey, we did this partnership here, maybe it could work here. So I think that wealth of information is really valuable. As well, as a technology provider can help with these partnerships with third-party providers. So like, Spare has that partnership with Lyft. So Mountain Line, for example, we don't have the contract with Lyft. We just have our contract with Spare. And so that can really help from definitely an agency perspective to kind of reduce, obviously, the number of contracts, but help with the liability as well. And then, Spare has that ability to add other partnerships as well, like taxi companies. And then I think from an agency perspective, I think if you are looking for a technology provider, I mean, obviously making sure that they are competent and aware of the paratransit regulations, and making sure that they can help you with brainstorming solutions and are aware of the various regulations. And I think, especially with paratransit riders, making sure that the app provides universal design and accessibility, making sure that there's components for if someone has a visual impairment, that there's, ability to still use the app. And so I think, yeah, Spare can also, brings that wealth of knowledge, but also those functionalities as well. But just in general, it's important to find a technology partner that meets the needs of the agency and their priorities as well.
I really like what you said, Estella, around universal design. It's something that we're seeing throughout most industries now, not just paratransit, right? Most industries are really pushing for universal design, and luckily there's a lot of different good tools out there that can support technology companies in order to build out these universally designed applications and whatnot. So it's really cool to be kind of on the forefront of that and be part of the conversation of how can we go be above and beyond what we're currently doing. So thanks for sharing that. Estella, you mentioned earlier around some of kind of the concrete benefits in terms of cost savings and smooth operations and lower wait times. Could you share a couple of numbers or stats that you've seen to be especially beneficial for you all?
Mm-hmm, definitely. So yeah, our cost per trip has gone down, especially with this Lyft partnership. For example, our current paratransit cost per trip is around $60. And in October, our average Lyft trip was around $13. So again, being able to kind of push and air it up, but have more people use Lyft can be a huge benefit to Mountain Line. And eventually, I mean, this is a new program for us with Lyft, but eventually, if we can get more and more riders wanting to use this service, potentially we can remove a vehicle, and that would be huge operating savings for Mountain Line, because our operational paratransit cost per hour is in the 3 digits, a little over $100. So it's definitely expensive to run paratransit, as I'm sure all the agencies on this line are aware of. And then with commingling, so with our microtransit, our cost per hour was able to increase by about 17% by introducing this new service and not really having to expand the operating hours. So again, we're able to do more with the same, to be able to provide more service with the same amount of operating hours. So those have been several wins for Mountain Line.
Mm-hmm. And thanks for sharing that. And I know I asked Sharad this earlier, but curious if you've evaluated other providers also beyond Lyft. I'm sure that many of the people here attending are in places that there may not be Lyft or Uber available.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, Flagstaff is a small urban community. We're around 70,000 people, and we do have a university here. And so it could be if we didn't have the university, we may not have Uber or Lyft here either. But luckily we do, and so. But I think our taxi companies are not very advanced. We really only have a handful of taxi companies. They're all kind of the owner is the driver with one vehicle. They use their personal vehicle. So it is very much kind of like a mom and pop operation. There's no yellow cab or anything like that in Flagstaff. And so this is an area that we want to explore further, trying to get some more brokering services. Currently, it is just Lyft, but I think we would like to look to maybe getting Uber as well, or maybe some, work closely with the taxi companies to try and so maybe might have to support them a little bit more to make sure that they're able to provide this service. So those are a few things, because I will say, I think it would be helpful to have some more companies. I think just having one can put sometimes a lot of demand on Lyft. And again, being a smaller community, there's only so many drivers. So we have had challenges with driver availability and things like that. So I think it helps to just provide several more providers just to help with that redundancy and to help meet the demands.
Yeah, you make a great point there. Thanks for sharing that. And in terms of smartphone friendly options, obviously that's kind of a big selling point with a lot of these more modern dispatch solutions. Have you noticed much demand for that, or you still see quite a bit of people calling in, and if you see a lot of people calling in, how are you thinking around like getting more and more people to adopt digital booking interfaces versus taking up valuable call center time?
Mm-hmm, definitely. So our microtransit area is quite unique. It's home to the largest homeless shelter. We have the food bank as well. There's a dialysis center. There's several different counseling services. It's very a high concentration of social services, and it tends to be a population that may be unbanked or not have a smartphone. And so it was really important when we did implement this to make sure that we have a calling option, and then we do have a web booking option as well, and then the app. But there's definitely people with smartphones. And so we did take kind of a boots on the ground approach with marketing and helping train people. So I'm still going to the shelter at least once a month, kind of going there, talking to people, training them on the app. We really worked with a lot of the social services where we do kind of like a travel training with the app. So make sure that the counselors and the case managers knew how to book a ride either on behalf of their client or could teach their client how to book. So I think it's important, especially with paratransit clients, to kind of take that extra step. So we would do, we went to the senior center as well and would do some travel trainings and kind of walk through the app, help them, download the app, set up an account, put their credit card information in if they felt comfortable. So those different things, I think it's important just to take that extra care and extra step. And once they get to know how to use it, they love it. Then they're, again, we talked a lot about having that kind of rider control, then they are able to see when the vehicle is coming, which can be a huge benefit, and know when to, leave their house instead of now, with traditional paratransit, it's that 15 plus, or at least for Mountain Line, it's that 15 plus or minus window, which is a long time, especially Flagstaff. It snows, it's cold. You don't necessarily want to be waiting. So I think with the app, it allows people to again, have more control and really know when their vehicle is showing up.
Yeah, I guess that's a huge benefit of actually being able to see the vehicle coming live instead of needing to call in to ask, where's my ride? So yeah, and I like the fact that you iterate that you need to tell people about this several times for them to really get it. This the classic I forget what the marketing metric is, but it's something between, like, you need to tell people about something between 5 and 10 times before they actually are convinced to actually try it out. So similar for transportation services, it sounds like.
Definitely.
Cool. We're gonna try and run a poll here for the audience, and we would love to hear what your top 3 challenges are when it comes to paratransit services. We're gonna kind of continue going on with this conversation, but we would love to hear your thoughts around this, and maybe we can bring in some of those interesting responses into the Q&A later. So you'll be able to see the quiz or poll module come up on your screen. Feel free to enter in there, and we'll continue conversation while people do that. All right. On change management, obviously change management can be a pretty big hurdle to adopting technology, especially when you're looking at changing from something that has been in place for many years. This is something that at least here at Spare we're part of every day, change management, from the very big to the very small and everything in between. So I'm curious from your point, Stella, what were some of the key things that you saw in terms of like changing in terms of technology and getting people to actually start becoming comfortable and adopting this? You obviously told us a little bit about how you got riders on board to use smartphone applications, but what about your own staff, your drivers, all of the more internal people?
Yes, I think this is one area where I think we could have improved upon. This is definitely a lesson learned if we ever get a new software for another program or something. I think it's important to really get everyone on board, and this should not just be kind of your high-end like leadership CEO decision, making these decisions, really getting buy-in from your dispatch, your drivers, even some riders, really making sure people know why are you making this software change? Our dispatch was happy doing these manual manifests. So it's like, what are the benefits? Why are we, switching to something? Because in the beginning, every software, it's not anytime you do something new, it's always a bit complicated, and it's, changing how to do something. So that's something, just really getting everyone's buy-in for that bigger picture as to what are the true benefits of the service. And for us, it was being able to dynamically book rides, being able to start this new microtransit service, serve a new area. But the great thing with Spare is it is, very user-friendly. It is easy to train people. And so we were able, once we did have Spare, being able to quickly train people, because I think with the manual creating manifests, the person doing it has such a wealth of knowledge. They know the clients very well in terms of which driver they like, which passenger they like to be with, and so that is I think that is a change with software where the platform was really to make the most efficient way of putting rides together. And there's various parameters that an agency can set up depending on their goals. But, the software's job is to create kind of the most efficient manifest. And so that is different than a human doing it. And so there's always going to be some change that comes with that. And so it's also making sure that the riders know, okay, you may not be always riding with Sally, for example. So making sure that they're aware of these changes, I think with paratransit. And then on our operator side, they weren't necessarily, we always had tablets in our vehicles, even with our previous software, but they didn't always look at them because we had printed manifests. They knew where all where people lived. And so that was a big change of really, look at your tablet, rely on your tablet, because now, a ride could slip in there, a microtransit ride might pop in there. So that was just kind of a culture change from really, trusting the tablet and looking at it. So there's a lot of details, I think, when implementing a new service, a new software, and just, again, bringing everyone on board and very much aware of the changes and kind of, that bigger picture of why are we doing this and what are the benefits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's you're certainly not the only one who wishes you could have done it better. It's often something that people forget, that we need to get all of these people to get used to actually using this, and we need to convince them that this is good. Mm-hmm. And this will allow for us to grow as an organization, to be able to modernize, to be able to take on new opportunities and address challenges in a different way. So thanks for sharing that. Shifting gears a little bit over to more towards the future, Sharad, as technology starts to become more embedded in paratransit services, what do you anticipate that the future of paratransit is going to look like?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I think there's some static pieces of paratransit that we'll continue to see in the future and look for some solutions. I mean, the ridership growth is going to continue. I think once we get past these post-pandemic levels or get back up to where they were, the population is aging, the population is growing. So there's no doubt that the paratransit ridership will grow. And as the regulations stand, it's a no denial. So it's going to continue to grow. I think the other piece of it that's always going to be a complexity of paratransit is the pre-scheduling aspect of it. So continuing to see pre-scheduling and how do you address that. And then the third one is driver shortages. So those three kind of tailwinds coming, or maybe I would call them more like headwinds, but either way they're coming, they're going to continue in the future. So I think where the systems need to really adapt, one is really more of the dynamic scheduling. So we know in every paratransit that there's massive cancellations on day of, or even the day before. So when you have paper manifests and you don't have dynamic scheduling, you have a lot of gaps in your schedule that could be filled in real time. So I think software moving towards the fact that you can insert trips in real time during the day of when the cancellations come will improve efficiencies automatically without any kind of additional use of services. The second one then is really this increasing of the fleet size. For years, it's been you take 100 trips, put them on 10 vehicles, and you need to make it work. Whereas now, if you take 100 trips and put them on 20 vehicles, but you're not paying for the other additional 10 by bringing in other fleets in the network, as we've been talking about, whether it's taxi, TNC, volunteers, local transport providers, I think that's really almost a necessity at this point, that systems have to start to evolve and having more and more of those in place. I think at this point, over 10% of all paratransit trips are actually pushed to taxi, primarily taxi and local providers. So I don't think, and then that's growing in all the biggest cities like Los Angeles and New York and San Francisco, and even a lot of places like Mountain Line with smaller communities are all doing that because they see the benefit in that going forward. So I think that between the driver shortages and the rising growth, that's going to be a key piece of keeping paratransit, giving proper performance for the riders, because the riders are going to keep coming, and they're going to be more and more trips. And so to make major changes to regulations, we're going to have a new supply of vehicles and then completely connected through technology. They can't be multiple different providers doing their own thing. They have to be all connected through one technology. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to manage going forward.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Sharad. Estella, any thoughts on that from your end, especially how it connects to what you're looking at doing in the next few years at Mountain Line?
Yeah, I think we definitely have a focus of trying to get more non-dedicated fleets to be able to broker trips. I mentioned previously, we don't have a ton of providers and Flagstaff, so I think it will take a lot of kind of staffing or, a lot of work to actually work with, kind of think out this side the box of other providers. We do have some other kind of 5310, so they provide service to seniors and older adults, kind of some so like the county and other people who provide some maybe client-based transportation services, but having those conversations and seeing if maybe they could be part of this to meet goals for both agencies. So I think that'll take some definitely work to try and focus on getting some more non-dedicated fleets. I think definitely some better integration between modes. especially like with our microtransit and fixed route. So can we, you know, so people don't have to have so many apps on their phone just to make one trip, but, you know, can we have one app and being able to really chain trips together from their home to maybe the microtransit to then the fixed route to then their end destination, and being able to seamlessly pay between all the modes. So those are a few things. I think we definitely, a big goal is to reduce our paratransit costs. So, and I feel like being able to broker trips to other fleets would be one way to get there, to hopefully be able to maybe remove a whole paratransit vehicle, because that will dramatically reduce our operating costs.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Cool. I think next we have time for some questions, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So we did get a couple of questions in from the audience. So I decided probably best to answer all of these live. I can read off the questions, and then we can see. We can. I think most of these questions are actually for you, Estella. So, but I'll try to fend someone over to Sharad as well. So the first one is from an anonymous attendee. Is Mountain Line commingling riders, i.e., micro and para rides, on the same vehicle at the same time?
Yes, correct. So one vehicle, if your neighbor is a microtransit rider and you're a paratransit rider, be one vehicle picking up both people, same vehicle, same time.
Okay, cool. Thanks. And have you actually, as a follow-up on that, have you ever seen any challenges with doing that?
We haven't, to be honest, which has been great. I think it does take, again, some awareness, making sure that the operator fully knows and can explain both programs, because, for example, they're different fares. Our microtransit is $1 and our paratransit is $2.25. So they're, you know, a rider did ask, you know, why is that person only paying $1? And for example, our microtransit zone is a very fixed, specific area, but then someone else got picked up outside that zone. So I think it's making sure that the operator feel equipped with being able to kind of help explain and answer these questions. And once the riders understood, there wasn't any issue, but because I think there could be some confusion from the rider side. So again, just making sure that your operators know the reasons and can explain to the people using the service.
That makes sense. And this is kind of a follow. This is another question here. It says somewhat of a follow-up of this one from Tim Bates. Is our microtransit riders certified for service along the same lines as paratransit riders? If so, what are the parameters for certification? Age, disability, other things? Estella?
So no, our microtransit is general public, so anyone can use the service. There's no eligibility prior. Obviously, our paratransit is, and it follows similar to the FTA regulations. You could, though, through Spare, if, for example, you wanted to have a microtransit for 60 plus riders, there is a way in Spare where you can kind of put people to different groups and assign people to certain services only. But our microtransit is open to anyone.
I see. And there's a lot more questions now. Just trying to follow the questions with some sort of thread. Here's a question from Adam Kinney. Do you have cancellation policies in place for both paratransit and microtransit?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you have cancellation policies in place for paratransit and or microtransit?
We do with paratransit, we do ask, you know, the day before. We do have some same day cancellations, but there are, you know, depending on how many times, if a rider keeps canceling same day, we could, you know, temporarily suspend the driver or the rider if it becomes an issue. We tried to align all of our policies in terms of rider kind of rules with paratransit and microtransit, so it wasn't confusing. So it would be the same with microtransit. I guess with microtransit, we're a little bit more lenient with same day cancellations. And again, with kind of being able that rides dynamically change depending on vehicle availability. it's not as much of an issue. So if a microtransit ride does cancel and then there's a ton of downtime, more rides can get slipped in to fill in that downtime, or maybe another ride kind of moves to another vehicle that makes more sense. So, rides can shift depending on what makes the most sense from an efficiency standpoint.
I see. Okay. Sharad, this is probably more of a question from you from an anonymous attendee. What if a taxi or NEMT provider already uses something like Taxi Commander? I guess this would also probably be for other types of dispatch softwares. We heard from Estella that one way could be that these providers just install something like the Spare Driver app on their smartphones, but many of these providers probably have their own software as well, and seems like one of them is Taxi Commander. How do you deal with something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's part of the evolution of the future of technology. So in the past, a lot of times agencies will give the MDT to the taxi provider or the local provider. So that was always the plan of kind of connecting the non-dedicated and dedicated vehicles. Then the next step was now the driver app. So Spare as an example, you can download driver app for anybody that's using a software. So then you have two different software. So that's definitely available. And we've done that in a number of markets. The next step really is direct integration with dispatch software. So to date, we've integrated with all the TNCs, and then we've started with this taxi software. So it's something like comparable to Taxi Commander. We would, if the software Taxi Commander would permit an open API, we could directly dispatch into that. We could build a connection directly. So what the advantage is always we've seen already in the last 6 months is that the provider, the taxi driver in this case, only has one app. All the trips come through the single app, and all payments are done in a single way. And it's been a huge it's been really good for both the TNCs and the taxis that we're doing that, to have a single dispatch in there. So I would say the answer is both. We have integrations take time, and it also depends on the taxi software if they can integrate. But it's definitely our vision at Spare to integrate as many as possible. Companies like Taxi Commander, iCabby, MTI, Curb. There's a number of these really large taxi companies that we are really focused on getting integrated in the next year.
Okay, cool. Thanks. This is probably a question for you, Estella. A question from Kevin. Do you include timed stops in your microtransit? I think that what Kevin refers to is probably virtual stops.
Yes, and I do see. Okay, so yeah, for the first part, there is we have kind of these different zones. So our microtransit is very much a first mile, last mile solution. So we do bring people to the closest bus stop, and then in kind of the main area, people can have door-to-door service in a certain area. So we do have like virtual stops, which are our fixed route bus stops for certain areas, and then it is door-to-door in another area. Okay,
thank you. And this is probably a good question for both of you. Probably a good question for both of you from an anonymous attendee asking around, saying that we have a union shop. Does any of the panelists have experience using Uber and Lyft in a union environment? I guess this also goes for additional providers beyond Uber and Lyft too, on the non-dedicated side. Estella, I'm not familiar with how things work at Mountain Line, but do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, this actually might be more for a question for Sharad. Unfortunately, or Arizona Mountain Line, we don't have unions. So for our operators, and I don't think our Uber and Lyft have unions either. So I'm not as familiar with that.
I think the primary question is probably more around taxi. I think a lot of the providers, when the first round, we managed a number of call center and thousands of trips a day going to taxis and non-dedicated providers. And it's just, it's partly has always been as the capacity constraints from the vehicles and the drivers. And it's always, union drivers always come first in the order, I would say, like as far as like scheduling goes, as those drivers are filled up and the maximum possible to the union shop, and everything is really considered overflow. That's really been the priority on the paratransit side, always with union shops, is that it's essentially it's the trips are going to them that cannot be delivered by union shops. And that's been, I think, traditionally across all the country, that's how the systems have been set up.
I see. Okay, thanks. So this is a question from Randy. It seems like this person knows you, Estella, because he recognizes your office. Yeah, he's has some questions. He has actually multiple questions. It seems like Randy cheated here with many questions on one question. But he's asking. He clearly has some experience around Spare, and he's wondering if you've seen any improvements in Spare's reporting. When he left, it was quite the process to interpolate data from the data dump.
Yeah, so yeah, we definitely have improved with Spare with reporting side. I know Spare is working hard on a new module as well for reporting. And so I think we have had to make some like custom reports where, you know, we're able to manage the data a bit better. I will say from an NTD perspective, so when it's a pilot, so our microtransit was a pilot at first, we don't report that data to NTD, or at least that's what we were told from our analyst. And so we did have to kind of separate some of the data out, which was a bit more of a manual process. But otherwise, once it becomes a permanent process, it would be demand response. So both your paratransit and your microtransit would be demand response. So that kind of helps streamline some of the reporting. But yes, I know Randy well. He used to be our operations manager here, and I'm happy, Randy, to follow up with you after, because there are a few more questions in there.
But I can say that most of those problems that you're referring to have been solved. And are you part of Estelle? Are you part of the Lock to Duty beta group as well, or it's the more we're just about to introduce a lot more manual intervention? So are you also being part of that? Okay. We'll set you up shortly after this webinar then.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, great to hear from Randy, and sounds like Estella will follow up directly with Randy afterwards. Sharad, this is probably a good one for you. This one is from Tim. He's asking around the drug testing requirements for third-party operators. Do you want to touch on that? I know that's obviously a topic that often comes up.
Mm-hmm. I think traditionally with non-dedicated, the first choice is to find operators that are following the FTA guidelines with the drug and alcohol testing and background checks. So a lot of markets, that's the primary focus, is bigger taxi fleets do follow the drug and alcohol rules. So that's the first step always. Then you can do a direct dispatch to them, especially in overflow or in rescue rides. So that's number one. The FTA has been pretty clear on their taxi cab exception rules. That if you have multiple providers as options, and the provider is provided that choice per trip, then you're able to do that. And that includes either two TNCs, a taxi and a TNC, a TNC and the city vehicles. So I think the guidelines are well in some of the circulators. It's not defined necessarily in the FTA rules, but in all the circulators, they've had a lot of follow-ups around how cities can manage with rider's choice to if the providers don't drug and alcohol test to the same standards. So then they are allowed to use that rule, the taxi cab exception rule.
Okay, thank you. This next question is probably a good one for you, Estella. This one is from Mark. Does Lyft perform door-to-door service for your ADA passengers?
Yeah, I'll clarify, because I think door-to-door sometimes means different for every agency. So the Lyft drivers does go, like, I would call it almost curb to curb, so straight right in front of the door. It does not take the driver to their door, which for example, our paratransit, we do have some clients where our driver will take them to their door, so help them up to their door. So Lyft drivers do not do that. So it's just like, I guess if you've taken a Lyft ride, you do get dropped off right at your destination. Yeah, so Lyft service may not be for every paratransit rider. I think it's worth clarifying that. We do have some paratransit riders that really need that assistant from the operator. And we need, some of our paratransit riders, our operators will make sure that the rider goes into their house, because those were the instructions. So I think it's just to know it's maybe not for every single paratransit rider, because maybe some riders may need extra care that your operators can provide.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I really like the fact that you mentioned around, like, it's about matching the trip with the right provider, and Lyft is not, or Uber or taxi, they may not be the right provider for that specific rider for that specific trip. So it's around you need to make sure that you match this. I would like to mention though that Lyft does have, and I'm sure Uber also has something similar called Lyft assisted rides. That they've launched this in a couple of different markets, and they're rolling it out more broadly, but it is more of an assisted pickup with them actually meeting the rider at the front door and dropping them off at the front door. So while not available in the normal Lyft service, that's something that at least Lyft is working very hard to achieve. And I think this also would go towards a later question that came in around from Jessica around like how Uber and Lyft drivers can adhere to similar training. I would highly recommend to look up Lyft assisted rides to look at some of their new programs around doing that. This next question is from Marcel. This must be for you, Estella. Have you hired non-CDL drivers?
So with Mountain Line, actually all of our operators can be both paratransit or fixed route. So we don't distinguish between both programs. It's kind of unique. So we don't necessarily have paratransit operators. They're for both. So we do have CDL, but technically our vehicles, you don't need a CDL license. So this can be a benefit to like implementing a microtransit service. It can be easier to hire drivers because they don't necessarily need a CDL license depending on the size of your vehicles.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Skipping down a little bit, around the NTD reporting, I know that was mentioned a little bit. How does NTD reporting and third-party providers actually work? Either Estella or Sharad can jump in here.
NTD, I think just this last year, they added a new category for taxi and TNC. I believe taxis are now required to be reported on that. TNC is not just yet. But I know NTD is very interested in seeing the numbers. If you go to the NTD website, you'll see all the trips that are being delivered by taxis that are being reported, which is about 10 million a year. So I think that reporting is becoming more and more, either if it's not required, it's becoming a lot more common by the agencies.
Yep. And just one thing to add, I think it's good to talk with your NTD analyst about pilots as well, because there's sometimes different regulations around pilots. If they know it's going to be a temporary program, they may not want you to report it.
Okay, perfect. Maybe this one is a good question from you, Sharad. This one is from Chris. Can Spare integrate with fixed route transit to feed microtransit customers from areas without fixed route service into the core system?
Certainly, we can, like in Mountain Line and other cities, we can set up the fixed route stops or the transit hubs as part of the service. So they can be within the schedule that the feeders can work in the timing. And then we have a multimodal opportunity where the fixed timing of the fixed routes are there. So we can try to coordinate the stops with the general pickups with the buses coming through there. So I think the general answer is yes, you should be able, we can coordinate the microtransits to connect in with the fixed route transit hubs or specific stops.
Great. All right. Last question. This one is from David. This one is for this one, is this for you, Estella?
I think so. I do know David as well.
Okay.
Okay. Planning.
Yeah. Based on the Mountain Line experience, do you have any advice for expanding inclusion during the customization of technical aspects of Spare?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned previously that our initial microtransit pilot was funded through CTA and part of their transit planning for all program, which it's a big emphasis on including older adults and people with disabilities in the planning, but as well as the implementation of the pilot program. And so we did have a big emphasis throughout, as well as implementation, to make sure that our program was usable by diverse populations, including older adults and people with disabilities. So we had a special steering committee, and we had kind of a testing group as well with people with disabilities to test the program and make modifications and changes and make sure that this program can be used by whoever. So I think that was a really important aspect of it. I think it's important whenever you're implementing a new service that it's not just for, I think especially with paratransit, that, you can make sure it's used by the people needing the service. And again, by, older adults, people with disabilities. So I think testing the program, having their input on even developing, if you end up doing like a procurement, sitting on the scoring committee, that kind of thing. We had some paratransit riders participating throughout that whole process. So I think that was really beneficial, and the end result, and make sure that the program can be used by the people you're trying to serve.
That's a great point. Thanks so much, Stella, for that. So I think that was the end of the questions and also the end of the presentation. There may be another poll that pops up. If you'd like to hear more about the future webinars and other ways to optimize your service from Spare, you can fill out the poll. And thank you so much, Estella. Thank you so much, Sharad, for joining this panel. It was great to hear your experience around the paratransit technology and what do you think where all of this is going to be going next. So thank you so much for being part of this, and thank you everyone for tuning in this lovely December 6th.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you all.
You.